In this video, we're going to talk about the Junos configuration model. What do we mean by the Junos configuration model? If we think about most network devices, they work in this way. We either log in via the CLI or we log in via their web interface, and we go and we apply some configuration. And for example, if we do it on Cisco and we go into the, let's say, an interface, we go into the interface, we change, let's say, the IP address. As soon as we hit enter, that change is done, it's immediate. The device has a new IP or we remove the old IP, but the point is that it takes effect. So this is not the case on Junos. On Junos, basically, we have the concept of an active configuration and we have the concept of a candidate configuration. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, the active configuration is a configuration that the device has at any given point. It's a configuration that's in use, so your interfaces, your IPs, your routing protocols, it's what's running the device. And the candidate configuration is a copy of that of the active configuration when you enter configuration mode. So basically, as soon as you go into the device and you type configure, the device creates a copy of the active configuration that's called by Juniper candidate configuration. So you can work on that configuration all you want, 2 minutes, 1 hour, anytime you want, without affecting the actual device. So let's say you have a device that's running OSPF and you go into the configuration and you delete all the OSPF configuration. If you don't apply it, it won't take effect. Your device will continue to speak OSPF without any issues. So it's the best way to see this. It's via diagram. So let's see it. Let's see it now. So let's say that this is going to represent my active configuration. This is going to represent the candidate configuration. And these boxes here are going to represent the backups that the Junos system does of that configuration, which is another nice feature of the OS. So, like I said, let's say this is my active configuration, so everything that's happening on the device. This is my candidate configuration, and this happens when I go into the device and go into configuration mode. So basically it creates a copy. So when I'm done with that, let's say that I input 20 commands or whatever number of commands I want to input, doesn't really matter, it can be 1 or 50 or any of them. You do it with a command called commit that we're going to see in more detail in future videos. But basically when you do commit, it does some checks to ensure that all the states that you have put in are logical. A common example is, for instance, you have a static route. So let's say you use the wrong network mask. So when you put the actual command in the CLI, it won't say anything. It would say, if you're using all the correct parameters, it will go ahead. But when you apply it, the system will check if that subnet mask is consistent. And if it's not, it will give you an error message saying, you can't do that static configuration because the subnet mask is wrong. So basically, it's going to do some checks like that. There's other situations, for example, where you're creating a user and you create the user and you specify the password, but you don't specify the class, the permission class where that user is going to live. It will tell you, you can't create a user until you tell the system what permission class that user it's in. So when I do commit, it will override my active configuration and then it will apply the changes. So if you change, for example, if we go back to that OSPF scenario, which means that you basically deleted all the OSPF configuration, when you actually do commit, then you will see the effect of that. So it's important to understand this, especially if we are beginning with Juniper, since it's a model that's quite different from the rest of the vendors. And also after the system does that, it's going to keep backups. So it's going to keep a backup of the configuration. It's going to keep typically up to 49. So it's also a nice feature, the fact that you can right there have a little history of how that configuration came to be and when it was changed, and in case it also gives us access to another interesting feature which is called rollback, which basically means that perhaps you did a change, you changed some routing policy or you changed some firewall filters, and now you want to go back because that was a temporary thing. So you can actually do it with that command. So instead of actually having to, let's say you added 50 commands, so instead of having to go and delete them one by one, you can just use a single command which will explore further in other videos called rollback, which basically allows you to, pick a time on the device where you want to come back, and you basically can just, type rollback and the number, and the system will match that configuration, and you can, move on. So if, for example, take that example, if you want to remove 50 commands you added for some particular reason, you can do it very easily with a single command. So let's see this a little bit on the CLI. So I have a router here that it almost doesn't have any configuration. Let's see what configuration it has. It has a user called lab, and this will show configuration. So basically we can see that it almost doesn't have any config. It has a root password, because if it doesn't have a root password, it won't allow me to save any config whatsoever. It has a username lab, it has telnet enabled, and it has an IP for management, basically. So that's basically my active configuration. That's all that's running in this particular router. So if, for example, I go into another shell and I, let's say, ping that device, we can see that it's actually replying. So this computer is sending echo requests to the router, and the router is replying. So to see the model in action, let's go into configuration mode. Let's take that IP out and let's see what happens to the ping. So I go into configuration mode. Now, like I said, now the system has an active configuration, has candidate configuration. The candidate configuration is where I'm going to be doing all the changes. So let's say I want to delete that IP address. So let's do that. Let's delete the IP address on interface EM5. So now I can actually check what's the difference between the active configuration and the candidate configuration using that command, which is basically show pipe compare. And it will tell me that the only difference is that now my candidate configuration doesn't have the IP address on the interface. So I apply the configuration. I haven't applied the configuration, but I executed the command. So now the candidate configuration doesn't have that IP address. So let's see what happens to the ping. So as we can see, the ping is still working because, like I said before, we can do whatever we want on the candidate configuration until we actually apply it using the commit command. It won't make any difference for the active configuration. So let's apply it and see what happens. So when we apply it, it's gonna now when I do commit, it's gonna do the checks. It's gonna do some syntactical checks. It's gonna make sure that everything we put in there makes sense and can actually be taken by the device. So if it's successful, it will tell me commit complete. If it's not successful, it will tell me why it failed, or if I'm missing the statement, or if I'm missing a command, or what's the reason, basically. So now I have basically rewritten the active configuration with the candidate one. So let's see what happened with the ping. So we can see the ping fails because now that IP address is no longer in use by the router. So I'm still in configuration mode. So let's say that I want to basically put the same IP back on the device. So I could do this in multiple ways. I could just re-add the command. Instead of a delete, I could tell the device set, which is basically the same as if you had a Cisco device and you went no IP address and then you went IP address on the IP. Or I could use the feature that I explained further, which was basically tell the system, okay, now I want to go to this last configuration. So basically that backup that you have. So let's go with the backup. So I can tell the system rollback 1. I can do the same show compare command, which will tell me what's different. And it's telling me that the difference is that my candidate configuration now has that IP address that the active one doesn't have. So let's say commit. And let's see what happens with that ping I have in the shell. Takes a little while, soon checks. And as you can see, we didn't see the message that it actually committed successfully. We can see it now. Commit complete. So we can see now that the ping is back. It's working back again. So it means that we have put the configuration. So it's a very powerful feature, and it's a very interesting way of approaching how the system handles configuration, and it gives us a lot of flexibility that it's not present in other vendors. So you can probably think about how many tasks are much easier when done like this. And it's a very nice feature to have, the backup of, let's say, 49 different configurations of your device, so you can see how the device got to the state where it's actually at, and you can see who made the change. So it's a very interesting thing that's very unique to Juniper, and we'll explore further ways and in further videos. We'll explore more about commit and more about rollback. But in the overall picture, it's basically as we saw it here. So thank you, everyone.